was the blackest night. There was no moon in sight. You know the stars ain't shining 'cause the sky's too tight. I heard the scary wind, I seen some ugly trees. There was a werewolf walking along the side of me.
Welcome back to yet another weekly Toronto Beer podcast. Not necessarily hitting every Friday, but we're certainly getting out eps more or less every 7 days. So life goals of 2017 continue. That's positive. Again, as stated last time, or if you weren't listening last time, and this will be news to you, Mandy away for a couple weeks running a brewery. Turns out takes up a lot of time, so we're giving her a couple weeks off. She should be back late winter, but in the meantime, I am being joined by a veritable cornucopia of guests, and I am super stoked to present my co-host this evening, Ren. Is it Navarro or Navarro?
It's Navarro, like the rock star and the Blue Jays baseball player.
Yes, fantastic. Ren, newly moved to, are you K-Dub, Kitchener, Waterloo, Guelph, Cambridge area now? Is that right?
Yeah, I'm in Kitchener now.
Wow. How's that working out for you?
I still start every line with, in Toronto we do.
So you're still Toronto self-righteous obnoxious. That's great.
Oh my God, yeah, totally.
Yeah, that doesn't go away.
No, it never does.
Well, I say that. I've never left Toronto, so who knows? As you do.
Right.
And remind me, who are you with now? You left Kensington, right? And now you're with?
I'm with Descendants Beer and Beverage Company.
Yes, that's right. That's fantastic. And how's all that going? You having a good time settling into the routines?
Oh my God, it's fantastic. I mean, I still haven't given up my Toronto end of the business, so I'm still out there every so often. Nice. And then otherwise, it's getting used to Southwest Ontario and people saying, have you been to this street? And me staring at them blankly, being like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, for real. Yeah. I don't really get out that way too often. But anytime, I mean, I go, cottaging and stuff like that. And, anytime you get anywhere really out of the city and you feel like, man, it should be so simple. Like, this is wide open space and like, I can't figure out why I'm having so much trouble navigating around here.
It's so hard. And I'm with you. Like everyone, but the thing that everyone explains about here is that there are streets that move north, south, and east, or like there's weird things where it's like, this street shouldn't do it, but it does. And I'm like, I'm never going to learn where I'm going.
Actually, one of my funniest preconceived notions, which actually could play into the theme later on, was Eric and I had gone to Niagara-on-the-Lake a couple of times after we'd gotten married, and I had some friends going down, and they were like, oh yeah, what should I check out? And I was like, okay, you got to go to this shop here, you got to go to this. But I was giving them directions, saying things like, okay, so this place is just north of Mary Street, and this is just, east of whatever, of Stone Road and whatever. But I was doing it based on the fact that in my world, the lake is always south.
Oh.
And in Niagara-on-the-Lake, it's north.
Yeah.
And so when they came back, they were like, yeah, we found everywhere you told us about, but like you literally gave us exactly the opposite directions.
Oh, God.
And then the penny dropped. I was like, oh yeah, you're on the other side of the lake. That really screws things up.
A little bit.
Especially when you lived in Toronto your whole life.
Yeah. And I don't give people directions out here because I don't know where I'm going.
Sweet. Okay, well, we'll dive in here. We always do the what are you drinking right now? I myself have I picked up a couple of bottles 2 weeks ago before I went to hockey. I popped into Radical Road Brewing, the newly minted in Leslieville, which is fantastic. So their Shoreline Saison, which it is, that's the kind of Saison I aim to make most of the time when I'm making a Saison. It's like spicy. It's very, very bright and tropically. It is just fantastic and effervescent. I dig that beer a lot. So that I think I could see becoming a bit of a regular around the old Schreier homestead. What have you got going tonight?
I have cracked open a Royal City Brewing Company Earl Grey Porter.
Oh, interesting. I haven't had that, and that's an interesting flavor.
It's idea. I'm a huge Earl Grey tea fan. And you have to be, because this is Earl Grey tea. Like it's huge amounts of bergamot that hit you straight in that face. The finish is a complete porter, and it's just like it's the easiest thing to drink if you're a huge Earl Grey fan.
Yeah, for real. Is the porter like more on the chocolatey or more on like the roasty coffee kind of side?
It's got more of the roasty.
All right.
That Earl has got enough of a kick to it.
Yeah. I was thinking it could come out almost like a Terry's chocolate orange in a way, because, you know, sometimes bergamot can kind of kick a bit of orange out when it gets into the high end. But but still, that's interesting. We one time, me and Mark Murphy with, who's it with? I think it was with Spinny, brewed an Earl Grey mango pale ale. No, was it mango? Yeah, I think it was. Earl Grey and mango. And that was an interesting one. I never ended up actually getting to try any of it.
Oh no!
But, I know, you know, after it had aged out on the fruit and stuff, Mark had gone and done the craziest thing ever and opened a brewery. And so, for all I know, it might actually still be in a keg in a cooler in his basement, just sitting waiting. But yeah, who knows? But we never got our hands on that one. But sure, the samples we were pulling sure tasted nice. So yeah,
nice.
Earl Grey and beer. I dig it. Yeah. So yeah, we are gonna just throw ourselves to the floor here and get the theme going. Which it's funny because when I reached out to you, you'd actually mentioned ages ago that you'd be happy to come and do a guest spot, that you enjoy coming on the Old Beer podcasts. And at the time, we weren't really doing guests, but obviously with this Mandy hiatus, that's exactly what the doctor ordered. So I reached out. And of course, the immediate thought for a theme is to talk about diversity in beer, because obviously it's something you've been hugely involved in.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And then I had to ask you and say, well, but do you actually want to talk about that? Because I could understand if you wanted to say, no, you know what I want to talk about? I want to talk about beer events for sport. I want to talk about like the beer mile and a dart league. And but you didn't. In fact, graciously, you said, nope, never get tired of talking about diversity. And it with the events of, well, I'm trying to think when this podcast is going up. It might even be yesterday by now. But the debacle in the U.S. and just even, you know, not to be purely pointing fingers across the border, just the regular occurrence coming up here, even in Toronto, of various ways that, particularly around gender stuff, the beer community still isn't as welcoming and equal as it could be or should be, let's say. It just keeps on coming. So let's start there. Let's start with gender-based stuff. You've been doing a lot of stuff with Society of Beer Drinking Ladies. Yes.
Yeah.
Do you want to elaborate a little bit on what you guys are up to, what you do, like sort of the mission and how you play that out?
Yeah. I mean, we're actually just coming up on our 3rd anniversary this month. And it really was created as a space for women in the industry to get together, have a couple of drinks, bitch about your life, kind of, not necessarily just sit and complain about things, but be able to hang out, have a bunch of beer with a bunch of women who get it. And when we first opened it up for tickets, we ended up not closing the ticket sales, thinking, like 40 women maybe. And that first event was like 110 women.
Yeah.
And ever since then, we always had a charitable component. So we have paired with the Canadian Women's Foundation. And they do everything from helping women find affordable housing, to education, to stopping sex trafficking, to helping girls and women with empowerment. And, just like those basic things of like believing in ourselves and knowing that we can do things regardless of what it is. And I think that ties back in wonderfully with our mission of being, you identify as a woman. So that's like cis, trans, questioning, fluid, whatever. And you're able to come into a safe space and try a bunch of different craft beer. There's no pressure for you to say you know what you're drinking. So, you're going to say, let's say you have the Earl Grey Porter. You like it because you like something that's florally, but you don't understand all the nuances, or you don't even care what they are. You just drank it because you liked it.
Yeah.
And that's what we've basically been running. And that's kind of the whole movement behind it. You know, the five of us all at one point or another worked at Great Lakes, and that's how we kind of all got to know each other.
Yeah, totally.
So,
That's
you know,
cool.
it's, yeah. So, I mean, we all have our stories of working in the beer industry, and this is the one thing where we just didn't want it to be that it's a platform to be like, I am woman, hear me roar. It's just, I am woman and I like beer.
I think one of the things that certainly kind of out of the gate I appreciated was that, and I don't have an example to point to that does it necessarily wrong, but there's always the concern or that the worry that you know, you can almost kind of make a feminist cliche out of it, where it becomes, like you say, like it's like you know, I don't know, like it becomes, like you say, like the I'm woman here, or like even worse, where it actually plays into some of the gender-based stereotyping that takes place, where it's just like almost rebranding it. And I've always just felt like, I'm like, yeah, this is just a good beer event designed in a way that it becomes accessible. And it's funny because I'll even confess, not with what you guys are doing, but with some early examples of stuff, not even in craft beer, but I'm thinking back to like 10 or so years ago, a conversation I had with somebody, because I was saying, like, I don't know, like, I worry that sort of an event makes a ghetto where you can bring people in and then they never are able to grow out into the like normal, you know what I mean? Or like the broader community. And actually, I mean, one of the main things that came out of it was there's a movement in a lot of churches to try and make a Sunday service like hip and cool and use lots of video and lots of music. But then if the church wants to remain with the way that it normally acts, it's very difficult to transition from the cool, fun, easy, accessible into the broader one.
Yeah. And I know when I did live in Toronto, there was a church that was just down the street from me that started doing like craft beer Mondays.
Oh, yeah.
And part of me was like, that sounds really cool, but that's not why we go to church.
Yeah.
Like,
no, it's
exactly
exactly
it.
it.
You know, there's almost that, and like you're saying, there's that like we're going to be hip today, but then how do we take a step back and say this was actually the original piece?
Yeah, and so with you guys, I've actually, it's funny. I still never been. I know dudes are allowed in after midnight.
Yeah,
but that's past my bedtime, Ram. I don't know. But my perception is they're normal events. It's like there's an array of beers. You can try them. It's in a bar or in a space. And so to me anyway, like the early indications was I was like, well, there isn't a risk of that. These are normal events. If the women who come in find themselves enjoying that, they might then be inspired to continue going to other events. Like it does what it should. It's a safe entryway to get exposure to the scene, which I think is great.
Well, and that's exactly what you want to do, right? I mean, it's you allow someone to come in and say, I want to learn about beer, but I don't want to be mocked for it. I want to go to a beer bar, but I don't want to go by myself because it's going to be a lot of guys. No, yeah. And I mean, like, no diss on guys, but sometimes a single woman doesn't want to sit in a bar by herself.
Yeah, no, for real.
You know, and you're not going to try an 8%er for the entire night and be like, this is going to be a safe thing. You know, and we wanted to really be able to say, like, we'll give you that safe space. And you know, I would say 90% of the events have been on the subway. For the few times they haven't been, we've teamed up with Uber to make sure that women can get free rides home.
Nice.
You know, we've thrown a couple events where they are everyone's welcome. We did the Women of Beer last year with the craft. We're doing it again this year. That's open to the general public.
Yeah, that's coming up soon, right?
Yeah, that'll be on the 18th of February.
Yeah. Even in my cocoon of getting ready to go to Nicaragua, I've actually been aware of some stuff coming down the pipe, and that's one of them. So that's cool.
Yeah, and we're looking at like 18 to 23 breweries, and everything will have been brewed by a woman.
Nice one.
Yeah.
What, with that in mind, not that event, but with the idea of kind of, making a safe entryway, What sorts of things? I mean, I know there's some pretty obvious stuff as an individual, but like for people listening, if you're involved in the scene, if you're involved in a brewery, if you're involved in a bar, what are some things that you think of when you think of like making a safer spot for a woman to enjoy a beer that maybe isn't super obvious? So like at Castro's, we're pretty good with sloppy drunk dudes hitting on women who are clearly not interested. We have a system, like we know how to deal with that. That's pretty obvious, right? But what are some more sort of less obvious things that you kind of have identified or that you feel aware of when you're out sort of in the wider scene?
I mean, well, today I worked an event and I had a guy mansplain beer to me.
That's always nice. That's always great. Briefly, I was at an event and I felt pretty bad. I was serving a beer and I served it to somebody and explained what it was, like not in a bad way. I wasn't super mansplaining, but I can't remember how I worded something, but it was just a little too close. And the woman was a brewer and I was like, oh, hey, hi.
Oh,
So tell me, what do you think of the beer?
Yeah. And well, yeah. And I got mansplained my own beer. So,
Nice.
but I mean, it's just things like that where it's, if someone misidentifies a beer or misidentifies a hop, like, dear Lord, don't jump on that. Don't take that moment to be like, I think you wanted to learn a lesson about this. Because unless that woman turned to you explicitly and said, hey, can you explain what this is? She probably doesn't want to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like there's a rare moment where you're like, gee willikers, could you explain this to me?
Right.
And I think that's, it gets forgotten. And I think that was, back to that whole need for a group. It's what also happens is when a beer group gets created, people latch onto it to be like, this is going to be the group that helps us break into things. It's like I saw a recent thread where it was like, how do we get more women to come out and do these things? And everyone said, let's pair with the SOBDL. And it was like, but we're not the only ones. There's other beer groups that, there's Barley's Angels. And there are people who are educating like the public in general, Crystal Luxmore, Robin LeBlanc. Like there are enough women out there who are writing things like this Toronto Booze Hound. So there's stuff out there where it's like, don't forget, there are multiple numbers of women. There are so many female brewers who are like, and I always, and I shudder at saying female brewer, they're brewers. And
right, exactly. That's right. Yeah. We've dropped the term brewster a long time ago.
And so it's just like, let's just reach out and get these people and say, hey, do you want to do a talk? Do you want to do these things? Like, we know you've got mad knowledge, but instead everyone says, well, we'll just pick one group because we know that group and they're out there. And it's like, yeah, but is that the right group to do that thing? Like, if you want to educate people, like maybe Barley's Angels is the better way to go. Or, or like Crystal and Tara Luxmore, like the Beer Sisters. And just, it's one of those things where it's like, we need to stop being lazy and saying, because we identify or we see this one group of women or this woman, they're always the go-to. Like Mirella's there, like, and I just like, as I say it more and more, there's like so many more women that are popping into my head and it's like, guys, like, just, and it's that same thing when you go to a bar. If you're the one woman who's sitting there and knows her beer, everyone's like, ooh, that's weird. You know your beer. And it's like, it's not weird.
Yeah. Would it be weird if it was wine that I knew? No. So it's not weird that it's beer.
Yeah. And it's just, it's one of those things where we need to get away from this whole thing about being, you're a woman, therefore you like the following things. And it's like, I can like those things, but I also like beer. I like gin. I like whiskey. Like, but all of those things are fine to like. But when I say beer, people go, ooh, that's weird.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it's the frustrating cycle of how do you get that to end?
Well, and the thing is, in a scene that so vehemently stands against like macro products or like the big three style beer, where Budweiser is sold, I was going to say on the backs, but it's mostly on the chests of, bikini clad women. And so that in so many ways we want to thumb our noses at that culture, but we still, no, I realize that's because sexism is more pervasive than just, macro issues like that. But that when you, the situation you were talking about, when people pointed out, just talk to the Society of Beer Drinking Ladies, I was one of those people.
Yes, but I did respond to your comment, and I said
there are others.
There are
exactly.
others.
Yeah, there are totally others. But the thing that gets me is, like, you would hope that if you make the mistake as a dude of being pretty, head up your ass about something related to gender issues around beer, that when you had it pointed out to you, your reaction would be one of, contrition, not one of active pushing back. Because again, culturally, we're supposed to be in a different place. And so even if you realize, like, oh man, I was wrong about that. Okay, cool. Now make it right. Like, don't keep being wrong.
Well, and it's funny. I mean, part of why I'm always like, I will talk about this topic is because it always comes up.
Right.
And I was talking to Karen from Wellington Brewing today, and we got onto this whole topic. And I said, growing up as a kid in the 80s, I don't remember everything because it's a long time ago, but we started talking about beer commercials. And I was like, well, I kind of remember the Clydesdales when they started. I remember Spuds MacKenzie, but I also remember Spuds MacKenzie with a bikini-clad woman. And I don't know what that has to do with beer.
Right.
I mean, I think of, like, Duff Dog beer, maybe, but...
Right. Well, let's be honest. The Clydesdales don't really have anything to do with beer either.
Well, but at least they tied it in as, like, the Clydesdales pull the beer to you.
They pull the beer cart, sure.
Right? So, like, it was a little more believable. But, we were talking about that whole idea of a bikini-clad woman holding a can of insert big name beer here, and the can is sweating, and instead of drinking from it, she licks the can. And I'm like, no, you're doing it wrong. Like, I thought you were thirsty.
No, because you know what? She might actually be really smart, and she might be using it as a form of a still, because she actually doesn't want to drink alcohol. She is actually thirsty and has no access to water aside from the water which is in the air. So she needs the condensation to collect somewhere, and
to
she's
keep her
opted
alive.
to use a cold can of beer.
I mean, maybe, but and I've
Bless her soul.
Honestly, I'm going to use that all the time now. But there was the whole, and I talked about this in a bunch of different spots, but Colt 45. So, and that's one of those. It kind of breaks out into kind of advertising to women, definitely advertising to men, and then basically targeting the Black community. And,
yes.
And so the whole Billy D. Williams cracks a can of this, and suddenly he's surrounded by like 18 women, and they're all like, oh my God. And he drinks this, and he's like, you too can be like this. None of the women actually drink the beer.
Right.
And then I think it was a year or two ago, they actually talked about bringing it back and doing Colt 45 updated commercials with Billy D.
Because people still drink Colt 45, I guess. I never even really thought about that, to be perfectly honest with you.
I didn't even know they still made it.
I've seen it occasionally, and this speaks to exactly that. I've seen it occasionally at LCBOs in Scarborough, in the big container. Like, it's not a small vessel of beer. But I just assumed it was there for the same reason that like Laker and stuff like that shows up, which is there's some sort of local market, I guess. But I didn't think about that they would still need to be advertising it. But there you are.
Yeah, like it's so bizarre. And then you start kind of taking a step back and saying, okay, there are more women as sales reps. There's more women in production. There are more women in brewing. But you look at these labels and you realize that, well, we're all getting hired, but something about those labels tells me that we haven't quite made it as far as we should make it.
Yeah.
You see these labels where it's like half naked women who are in these weird seductive poses. And it's like, I don't know about you, but when I drink my beer, I'm not on my knees because my knees are horrible. I'm wearing a hoodie and jeans. I'm not in a bikini. Like, that can doesn't speak to me.
No.
But the thing is, I don't know who that can speaks to.
Yeah, it's weird. Like I try and kind of reconcile it out a bit where like I completely understand the way that you can hit a dude's conscience by just splashing some boobs on something. And it's funny, like, but again, in our industry, it's weird that separation hasn't been made yet. Like, no, like, we don't do that. And I mean, to be fair, a lot of breweries don't do that. And you have to assume there's at least a somewhat active action there, where it's not just that Great Lakes hasn't gotten around to horrifically objectifying a woman on a label of their beer. They've said, no, we're not going to do that. Whereas other breweries, and I don't particularly feel like pointing fingers, although I just saw one today that I'd never seen one of this brewery's labels before, not from Ontario, but with the back of a naked woman on the label. And it's from a very, very respected brewer. And I went, really?
No. I know Ben Johnson, maybe a week ago, kept posting labels for beer that was called Dirty Blonde.
Yes.
And I mean, he posted like a dozen labels, and one was like, yeah, that one's okay.
Right.
And every other one was these weird seductive poses that it's like, if most of us sat like that, we wouldn't stand up afterward, because your spine would be crushed. And but it's back to that same thing where a brewery will say, we want to engage our female fans and we want to get them in and we want to do this and blah, 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 blah. And then they turn around and they throw that out. And it's like, really? Or do you just want my money?
Right. Like,
there are enough breweries that just go with really plain labels, or they go with characters that are fully covered. And it's
right.
It's this weird, like, okay, and I mean, thinking of the breweries that I've worked at, like, none of them have done anything weird where it's just like, dude, really?
Yeah.
I mean, right now Descendants has 3 characters that are fully clothed. Right now they're women. Like, right now they're men, but
right.
Like, female characters will be introduced, and everything about it is like an easy peasy thing.
What's funny too, like, we've opened ourselves up here, although we don't have that huge a listenership at the Toronto Beer Podcast. But when you say something on the internet and then you're like, oh, I better fact check that one. I started thinking about Great Lakes because I was like, well, now hang on. What was the package for No Chance with Miranda?
No Chance with Miranda.
But then it occurred to me, it's entirely possible Miranda was like on board, because that's a real person.
Yeah. So
right?
Yeah,
it's not a representation even necessarily of her, but the dynamic shifts when it can be like, no, this is actually a picture that represents the person who this beer is named for. And you get closer to objectification, the more clothing that comes off. But as I recall, it wasn't a particularly indecent picture.
No, she was wearing a long black dress, I think.
Although that might be, you might also be thinking of the Audrey Hepburn, which was a long black dress, which again was a tasteful picture. That's an iconic picture, really. It's a take on that classic cigarette picture.
Yeah, I mean, and it's, and for any missteps that they ever made, they were pretty fast to fix them. But the thing is, it's one of those things where breweries either realize that, hey, this was a thing that wasn't cool.
Yeah.
Or what I've been seeing in a huge number is they go and take the whole, haha, just kidding.
Right.
But, and I mean, I don't want to drop names of beers, but there's ones where I think of, and it's just, it's a girl and it's buxom, and it has nothing to do with the beer. It has nothing to do with the brewery. It's one of those things where it's like, your brewery name doesn't even evoke a human. So why are you taking that route?
It evokes a popular extreme sport.
Yes, exactly. Oh my God, you read my mind. And that was one of those ones where they came back and they're like, well, we're just kidding. Right. And it's almost like making a really horrible mom joke, making your friend cry, and then you're like, oh my God, I'm just kidding.
Right.
But then you don't take it back.
Right. No, exactly.
And then you tell the joke again a week later.
That's right. And here's the thing. Like, I think about times when breweries have made potential missteps on labeling, and you can see it and you're like, that's a joke that between 2 or 3 people, would be considered acceptable insofar as their relationship is concerned, but in a broader perspective is just completely unacceptable. And so you kind of see that's different than like, oh, we were just having a jokey marketing campaign. It's like, no, you're a horrible person, actually.
Yeah. Well, but you took the time to like get those printed and put them out in the public.
That's right. A graphic designer worked on this project, and yeah.
I just like, I know my mother-in-law always says it's easier to beg forgiveness than ask permission, but there is a moment where you need to take a step back and be like, is my mom going to slap me for what I just did? Because the answer for a lot of those labels is she should be slapping you with a baseball bat.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
And God help us if you have a daughter. Like, and I feel that we're still at that weird jokey, huge quotes around that phase where people are doing the, well, we're just kidding, or we really love women, so that's why we put them on the label. And it's just back to that whole, but yeah, really? Because that has nothing to do with your product.
Yeah.
And it's that problematic. I mean, there are labels where I'm like, it's okay. It's not great, but I can't explain why I'm going to give it a pass. Like, let's say Naughty Neighbor. So the original Naughty Neighbor label gets a pass from me because I know, yeah. And it's one of those, it gets a pass because if I compare it with the old label and the new label, the old label made sense.
Right.
Because it was that, Buxton, the Buxton woman, Uncle Sam. It's an American Pale. I get it. Yeah. I don't understand the current like naughty nurse style pose on it.
Is she a nurse? I confess to not really getting that beer all that often. Not partially because of the labeling and partially just because of accessibility. I always thought she looked more like a hippie. Okay, let me actually, and I'm not testing you here. This isn't like, well, I'm going to come back over the top, but I'm actually just curious because I had a similar thing where I started trying to reconcile out some of the beers that I was continuing to buy, despite the fact that at least some people, if not a lot of people, would say, oh, that's got a pretty bad label on it. So what about, is it True to Diablo does Dulcis Succubus?
Yes.
Which has a very sexy label. That is, it's tough, right? It's a succubus. That's how they're generally depicted in art. But that depiction is an objectification. And it's the name of the beer, so it does fit. It helps that the beer is really good.
Well, see, and that's, that's the conversation that you end up having where it's like, okay, so I give a pass to this beer, but I don't give a pass to this beer. And it's a woman who looks really tough, but she's also wearing like, if she sneezed, she'd be naked.
Oh, definitely.
But God, she looks like she could cut you with like a pinky nail. So it's that thing, and I don't know. I mean, it's like, what are we putting out there for the world? And is this why we have a women in beer problem? Or is there so much more to it?
Yeah.
And I mean, really the short answer is there really is so much more to it. Because, I mean, I've only been in beer for 5 years now.
Mm.
And in those 5 years, I've seen the number of women like jump incredibly. The joke used to be that you'd be like, oh, I saw a female beer rep today, and you could like name 3 women. You'd be like, oh no, it was her.
Right.
And and when I think of it now, it's still like, oh, I saw a female beer rep, and you can be like, oh, was it? And then name like 10 women.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of if we bring in like race, I can name 10 women, and I was like, oh no, it was the black one, and then it's like, oh, so you saw red.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Which is let's actually transition into that now. That's a good transition, and we flirted with it with Colt 45, but thinking about, I mean, people of color, and very specifically like just not white dudes for the most part. We've covered off some stuff with women, but I mean, yeah. People of color would be, disproportionately underrepresented in the craft beer community. And I've read a bunch of different things kind of exploring those, the reasons why that could be the case. But I've never really kind of been like, I feel like there's something obvious here. Like, yeah, I totally gel with that. I'm always like, oh, those are some interesting ideas. That's interesting. Marketing differences historically. But I don't know. What do you think?
I always struggle with it.
But sorry, can I hang on a second? If you're listening and you don't know who Ren is a person of color.
Yeah. Oh, yes, there's that.
Okay.
But I always, I think of it as this, there should be more of this. And I feel like, and again, I've had this conversation with people, but I always feel like the marketing is very specific. Like when I think of a guy on a can, it's usually like a hipsterish kind of guy. Or, like one of our characters, everyone's always like, oh, it's the Assassin's Creed guy. So it's like, it's these very specific kind of touch points. And if you were to make a can or a character that was non-white, people would lose their collective minds. So then you get into that whole, how do you do it without offending and making people think you're mocking them?
That's right. Yeah. Because the ways that I think most people's minds would go if you were like, okay, market this to a non-white person would just be, stereotyping it. Like I think part of a significantly big part of the cultural problem, particularly around like white privilege, is that most white people don't have much to go on other than stereotypes when they're dealing with non-white people. And so it becomes immensely difficult to be like, I want to do this, but I'm afraid to ask. And all I've got is like, well, what if we could get Michael Jordan to hold the can, right? Like,
well, and that's the thing, right? But I mean, it's like when you see Gordy Levesque,
yeah,
on that can, I can name like 20 guys that I personally know who look exactly like that guy.
Yeah, down to the clothing. Even.
Oh God, yeah, like they're all like spitting images of it, and they all think it's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
But if you made, a character that was non-white, how do you do it? If it's a black guy, he's got dreads. He's probably got a spliff, or if he doesn't have a spliff, he has a Rasta hat.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, it's probably eyes half closed. If it's a woman of color, she's got a huge butt, she's got huge boobs, and she's possibly giving you a come hither look.
Yeah. Afro, don't forget an afro.
Oh yeah, and like the most killer afro ever.
As big as her butt.
Oh God, bigger. But it just like, it
Ideally.
gets, totally. But it gets to these points where you have to go into these weird characters and these like cartoonish characters for people to get what you're doing, but now you've offended everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of that, well, how do you draw the line? Because obviously, a lot of us don't look like those things.
Right. Yeah.
And if we do, we're dressing up as Cleopatra Jones or like, like, yeah,
it's a fancy dress party.
Yeah, it's a fancy dress party, but we're poking fun at it too. Yeah. And it's like, if you put that in a can, like the brewery would be firebombed and burned down the next day.
Absolutely.
So it's that weird, tricky, like, how do we do this? And there is no answer because there's no one even willing to like try and touch it.
It was interesting. And again, this might come off as kind of like a little bit stereotyping. But I remember, was it 2 years ago when Bose did Golden Vox with Chaos?
Yes.
And I wonder if that sort of reaching out partnership, not in a greedy way, like, oh, we need more people of color buying our beer, but just in a way that it's like, hey, that's a way that you can, in an uncliched way, try and create a culture in the marketing of at least some beers that's like, like it doesn't have to be about a white lumberjack or a smoking hot white chick. Like there are other ways that we can do this. I thought that was interesting.
But think of that label. That label is a fox in an outfit. It's not even a human.
Yeah.
Right? Like you had to get away from it so far away that you said, we'll just throw an animal up in like rapper's clothing.
Yeah, and it's funny because I know that they made it in partnership with Chaos, and I bet it does say on the label, but it doesn't really say it like across the front of the label. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, I know that Bose did do. Oh God, I'm totally gonna mess it up. They did like an Abbey beer with a bunch of baseball playing monk type guys, and one of them is black. on the label. And but it was a very like, here, we just made a label.
Yeah.
I want more of that. That's what I want. We just made a label. There's a bunch of guys on it, and one happens to be black. Like, move on. It's really that they're playing baseball.
Right. Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's like you don't get a biscuit because you were like, well, we tried to be inclusive.
Right.
And again, fine line. And it's, if you go to like Halifax and like the second you get outside of Ontario,
yeah,
people of color start showing up. So it's this weird thing where I've had a bunch of, and of course it's always white guys telling me, well, people of color don't do it in Ontario because it's really expensive. And it's like, so why is it that if I travel outside of Ontario, suddenly there are people of color doing things? Mm-hmm. And they're not doing it in large numbers. So I'm not saying like travel outside of Ontario and there are like 1 million of them, but it's to the point where it just almost seems like Ontario has this weird problem. And is it because there's a bunch of white guys saying, well, it's just really expensive, so only white people can do it? Or is it this weird, well, we tried to include you, but we couldn't find a way to like make a cartoon of you where you wouldn't kill us and our families? Like, I also have had this conversation with my friends of color, but the problem, quote unquote, is that they just don't like beer. They're huge cider fans. So let's move to cider. There's still not a lot of people of color in cider in Ontario.
Yeah.
Like, how many people can you name? One.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's interesting. I noticed, I think it was last year at a session, I was pleasantly surprised that I would still say half the crowd was white dudes, but the other half was a nice mix of women and non-white people, predominantly dudes. Unfortunately, not a lot of female people of color there, or I shouldn't say not a lot, but certainly not as much as there were dudes. But I thought, something's going right here. I don't know if it's because it's in such a central spot, or if it's marketing or in the booking of the entertainment, or what the deal is. But I thought, man, that's more so than most other festivals I would go to. That festival is starting to shift more towards the middle, but still.
Yeah, and I think,
guess.
Well, but I think they've also played it really smart. Like last year at Session, the Society of Beer Drinking Ladies took over a session, and probably got in a bunch of women who never would have gone otherwise.
Yeah, totally.
And who wanted access to those beers, but was like, I don't know if I want to go. So, once again, you get back to that same thing where when you think of these huge events where it's, the women are going with their boyfriends, their husbands, their male friends, and they're not going as a group of women. I remember going with my wife to Cask Days, like probably 4 years ago, and having this poor man, I wish I could find him again and just hug him, because he was so excited that there were two women hanging out by themselves at this beer festival, because all the women he'd seen otherwise were with guys, and it was like
with dudes. Yeah,
but it's that moment of like, just think about this for a second. But and he just
by the way, we're not unaccompanied, we're accompanying each other.
and he basically followed us around for the rest of the afternoon because he was just so amazed at it. And I ran into a bunch of my female friends, and they sure enough were accompanied by several men who were friends and boyfriends and husbands. And it's this weird, like, you can't go by yourself, or you can't just go with a bunch of women.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, that was 4 or 5 years ago. So it is changing, and it's slowly changing, but that is still predominantly a guy's event.
Yeah.
And that has nothing to do with the people who are organizing it. It has nothing to do with the people who are running it. I think it's still just that overwhelming mindset of, guys being like, I can go and get like the beer that I want here, so we're going to go in large numbers. And women kind of being like, I went last year, or my friend went the year before, and this was the experience. So like, let's go as bigger groups. And and again, not bigger groups of all women. It's always women accompanied.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I mean, I'm sure someone right now is like, oh my God, you are so wrong. And I would love to be proved wrong, because I want to be like, I love craft beer. I love the industry. I love working in it, but I want to see it catch up a bit more. I want to go to an event where I am not mansplained my own beer by a kid, where I was like, I am old enough to be your mom. But it's those things that are still there.
Yeah. Okay. So here's one more. So again, filling in people at home, covered off some gender-based stuff. I don't think we're coming up with any necessarily solutions, but it's interesting to, to consider. Even in this, I started thinking, I've never really thought about it this way before. In terms of if you're running an event, the difficulty trying to make it a more gender friendly, gender neutral, not neutral, but you know what I mean? Like gender accepting venue. The actions that you have to take are very, 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 not just different. They're obviously going to be different, but you're attacking a completely different problem than one based on like race identity, where it becomes, I mean, with gender-based stuff, it's that there's a problem that, women might want to be coming, but they don't feel comfortable. On the flip side of that, obviously you're speaking anecdotally, and I don't presume that you speak for, all people of color, but you're like, for a lot of my friends, there just isn't interest. And so it's like, man, like, it's one of those things where, like, again, I'm a, white dude. And so it's like, oh, like there's these problems and they're about equality and they probably have similar fixes. And it's like, no. They have very, very, very different fixes.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things where it's kind of that, like the literal vicious cycle where you kind of make half a step forward, you say something wrong, or you say something incorrect, or you think you're being really great and open, but oh no, stop talking. And then you take these massive steps backwards, and then you have to fix what little progress you'd made, fix that relationship and then be able to move forward again.
Yeah.
And I feel that as long as there are some people who speak louder than others and are able to get their message across that say there isn't a problem, there's nothing to fix, it's always going to be that issue of trying to climb that massive mountain. There are people like you. There's Ben Johnson's been working on it. There's there are people who are out there who are like, I feel weird trying to fix the problem, so let me just try and help and understand. Mm-hmm. Because you're a white guy and people are already kind of like, oh my God, you're a white guy, you can't tell us. But I think we also need to get over that and stop saying, well, you're a white guy, what do you know? And it's like, well, there are a lot of white guys. And if we can get a bunch of those white guys to understand, or at least question, or at least just listen for a minute and say, I don't have an answer, but thanks for bringing this forward. Who knows if we can ever fix it? But let's try and update it or make people feel a little bit more comfortable that in the future we'll see those people showing up to these events, or we'll see them brewing, or we'll see them going to homebrew competitions, or. Mm. And I think that those are things that, it's the never-ending conversation, because that's how it goes. And we're starting to do things right. Like I said, there's way more women in craft beer than I'd ever seen before, specifically in Ontario and in Toronto and surrounding areas.
Yeah.
So we're getting to that point where, more women are owners or co-owners of breweries. I always say, like, don't look at Vancouver, because, like, every woman out there owns a brewery. But it's just, progress is being made. So bravo, or brava. But I feel like it's one of those things where we're never going to stop talking about it, because it's one of those issues that will always be tricky.
Yeah. And I think the point that you make, that's a good one, is that especially coming from a place where, your experience, I'm using a generic you, not you, Ren. My experience is one of limited to no, for any form really of what's the word I'm looking for here. Discrimination. I can't believe it took me that long to come up with that word, given the theme tonight. But having had virtually no discrimination against me in this sort of setting, that one of the biggest things is just having the conversation and I mean, in this case, we're having it in a public way that people can listen into what we're saying, but that, just continuing the conversation and being willing to listen to where the problems are, even if you don't have a solution. I think that is an important step. One more thing, we're getting dangerously close to the witching hour, but I think I'm going to go for it anyway. And it's an interesting one because I feel like it isn't talked about much. And so I'm curious from your perspective if it isn't talked about much because it isn't a problem or because it just isn't talked about much yet. But what about LGBTQ2 representation within the industry?
I don't think it's out there enough. And I think it's also one of those things where people are like, I want to talk about it, but I'm a little scared. There have been missteps in the past. There have been bars that have made huge missteps and have had to backtrack and apologize. And what I feel and what I see lately, and I mean, I'm old and jaded, but it's, and the thing is, like, it's our spending money, right? A lot of us up till a certain point didn't have kids and we're total, like, dinks, dual income, no kids.
Yeah, for real.
I think that lately a lot more in that community are having kids. So now a lot of my friends are like, I'd love to go out, but babysitting duty, or like, my kid's only 6 months. So I think that's really starting to change in terms of how to market to it. When I think of Pride, which is really just one massive consumer marketing moment, craft beer is still not breaking into it because craft beer doesn't have the money of the big guys.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's, it's a completely different scale.
And because, those of us of a certain age just remember it being marketed to that way, I think craft beer kind of has it, it's kind of a difficult way to break into it. It's slowly changing once again because, kids are coming out younger and realizing who they are at an earlier age. So they're much more aware of things and much more aware of their needs. And because, a lot of them are craft beer fans, I think that shift is going to happen. But it's also that same thing where it's, back in the day, there was a Pride beer made once.
Okay.
John Graham, who owns Church Key, actually has a collection of bottles of it. And I think it's from the 80s. And he had said when they were sold in paper bags because you couldn't walk around publicly with it.
Oh, man.
And it literally just says Pride, and then it's got a pink triangle on it. So, you see that at some point someone was like, we want to market to you, but we don't know how to do it.
Right. And even if we do get halfway there, we're probably going to cover it up for the public's sake.
Because we really just want your money.
Well, do you remember, I think for a year or two, Toronto Festival of Beer did the Thursday night was queer beer night.
Yes. And all of my straight friends went and they all had the best time ever. And Ace of Base played and then they got rid of it. And and God knows why they got rid of it.
Yeah. I actually feel like I did know the reason why, or at least the sort of the company line anyway, but it's escaped me now. It was one of those things where I was like, yeah, I mean, I can understand what you're saying. You know what it was? I'm pretty sure is they weren't getting the marketing response from ticket sales. And I'm willing to bet there were probably some key sponsors who were like, hey, we need higher revenue off this night, and it's just not happening. And they were like, it's just not viable, which is a shame because, I mean, sometimes you do something like that, not because it's a key moneymaker, but because it shows that you support something more than just supporting the Stella Artois line. But
right?
That's neither here nor there.
I also feel that one of those years was the year that the whole Coors controversy came out. Where their president was totally like, I don't want gay money.
Oh,
and then they got pulled from like
I can't believe I forgot about that.
Yeah, because they got pulled from San Francisco Pride, and they were like, why are we not making any money? And they were like, oh no, you guys bought our beer. We said bad things. We are so sorry.
Yeah.
And I think it may have been around that time. So I'm sure they were like, hey, we're not making enough money because we said something bad, and now the public's punishing us. So we're going to take this night away.
Yeah, that would make sense.
And if I'm wrong, I would love for someone to be like, no, actually, this is what happened.
Well, I mean, I'm sure. I don't know if what the timelines were, but that sounds completely plausible. Like, I have no trouble believing that, because that would fit it's just not, it's the revenue's not there. And it's like, yeah, maybe the problem was everyone was just spending money at the smaller breweries and the big guys on the perimeter weren't getting enough tokens. So,
but yeah. And but so looping it all back, it's one of those things where when you market to a specific group that is non-white or is not heterosexual or not cis or they are suspicious.
Right. So, rightly so.
Because if they are not your primary target market, why are they now your market? And the thing is, you can get around it. I mean, companies everywhere else do this all the time. But I just feel like there's still enough people who are either making the decisions or primarily a group that is not discriminated against or is not supremely diverse, being like, we know that if we do this, it will be seen as insincere, so let's just not do it.
Right.
And when beer companies change logos or add rainbow flags to the back of their Twitter page or whatever for a month, I think you just want my money through the month of June. So I don't trust it. And, and I know a bunch of these places, and I know a bunch of the people who work there, and I'm like, I know you're gay and that they support you. But when you put a marketing piece of a pride flag up for a month, I know you just want my money.
Yeah.
Like, randomly throw it up in March. Just randomly do it.
It's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Huh.
And I think that, it's because people don't think about it. They're just like, well, I just want to show that I support you for this month. And it's like, well, yeah, but BMO also bizarrely supports me during that month and tells me that if I put money in my TFSA, I'll get $100. So it's, I'm sorry if I don't trust you when you do this. However, like, you and 18,000 other companies suddenly care about me and my wallet and my needs. And, and that's that same thing when, you market certain things to women. It's like, when are you doing this and how are you doing it? And it's, it's this giant problem where I think we've almost gone too far where it's like, you have to prove that it's a good intention.
Right.
But if you're dealing with kind of the majority of people who are in craft beer who are like white and straight and yada, yada, they don't question it. If you do this thing and you're like, I did this thing for you, everyone's like, yeah, high fives. But the second you market it to like a minority group or like, the lesbian, gay, trans, like, just those guys, we're all like, why did you do that? So
that's interesting, because I was thinking, as you're saying that, I was thinking about like barriers to access. And so at a festival, I mean, if somebody's being like verbally abusive in public, I think it doesn't matter why, they're probably going to get shut down. But a brewery could have a beer label that is directly referencing a young woman taking her top off for the enjoyment of the fellow who may or may not be consuming the beer. And most people would shrug that off. But like, I wonder if people would be more quick to push back against a beer label that was homophobic.
There
as opposed to gender. Was there?
Yeah, there was one. Came out a few years ago, and it didn't last long. But it was one of those things where it was like based on a true story, quote unquote, and was kind of an inside joke label, but was sold to the public. And and the thing was, a lot of people loved it and didn't see a problem with it.
You mean the joke or the beer?
Both. So there weren't a lot of people who were like, hey, wait a minute, that's not cool.
Yeah.
And then, a few people did complain later on, but it's this weird thing where it's like you can make a certain group of people a punchline, and it takes a little longer for someone to be like, hey, wait a minute. Whereas we can get mad about other things really quickly, and it gets identified and corrected, and apologies are made immediately. So I mean, I don't know. Like I don't know what the solution is. I don't know if it's does someone create a task force where every so often people sit down and kind of say, this is why I did this thing? Because the thing is, I think that if you make a label that enough people have a problem with, because someone is always offended by everything.
Sure.
But if you have a group of people being like, dude, what have you done? You should be able to, or you should have to be able to turn around and say, this is why we did it. Cannot use the words, we were just kidding.
Right.
And explain it fully. Be an adult. Because, in your day-to-day life, when you do weird things, people are like, yo, what'd you do? And you have to explain it. So if you pick a label that people are just like, what? You gotta say, this is why we did it. And, like, maybe you're right. This was a bad thing. Like, there was the brewery that had God, I honestly, I wish I can remember the name of the brewery. They came up with that beer called Date Grape.
Oh, yeah. There was a U.S. brewery, right?
I think. I'm not even sure, but they came up with that name. Everyone obviously lost their minds, and they came back and said, okay, so we totally made a mistake. Next time we're actually going to sit down and like veto our names. And most people were like, yeah, that's cool. That's a really great explanation. And I was like, seriously? Someone pitched that, and an entire room of people were like, boom, go with it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and it's just, and for what I remember of that, they were just like, we're not going to do it again. But if a restaurant does something like that, the restaurant then has to donate money, and their staff has to go through sensitivity training. And so I think and feel that craft beer needs to kind of get to that point where when you make a misstep that is that massive, you can't just be like, sorry, like, we'll vote on it properly next time. It needs to be like, oh my God, we totally messed up. Here's X amount of money to our favorite charity. Maybe we like sit down and get someone to train us on like why that was a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, I don't know. I mean, like, we obviously live in a really awesome bubble of craft beer, but every so often that bubble gets a little overcarbonated.
Yeah, it definitely does. It's interesting. I was thinking about that. Like, my immediate thought, because I'm such a, I believe in the system kind of guy. I'm like, yeah, I mean, there's potential for like human rights tribunal issues against sorts of advertising and marketing and stuff. I stopped and I thought about it, and I'm like, no, like, that's not the way to fix this problem, right? Like, the way forward is like the restorative, where like what it needs people who are willing to hear when they're wrong. And I think that's probably going to be where the argument turns, whether it works or it doesn't, is, it isn't just enough to say, oops, we screwed up, but you need to be hearing from the people who were affected. And then you need to be willing to work with those people to move forward. And that's cultural, right? That's something that we don't have right now in any of the three, not themes. What's the word I'm looking for here? Demographics. Those are all the wrong word, but you know what I mean? That we don't have a sense of that for any of it, so that when you do call out a sexist label, it's, oh, we're just kidding. It's like, no, I think if we want to be better as an industry, it's going to need people who are willing to own their mistakes better than that.
Yeah. And just
that's not a solution, unfortunately. Let's just be better.
Well, yeah, exactly. Just be better. Like, let's just be better humans.
Yeah.
I just, and I mean, there are like quasi uproars, but they're always quiet enough. And I mean, old guy moment, with the age of the internet and everyone having access to like cat videos and, being able to be anonymous when they're just ripping someone a new one, it makes it really hard, I think, for a brewery to be like, well, I guess we can work on this. But when someone's basically like getting down to like 5-year-old language, being like, you're a bunch of stupid poo heads and your labels suck. Use your words, be constructive. Say, I really love your beer and I really love your products. However, my problem as a woman of color who is gay, who is, a big craft beer fan, your label alienates me in the following ways. maybe they'll just send me a coupon for a free beer. I don't know, but it's just
Right.
we need to get to that point where we're able to have a real dialogue. Instead of just saying, well, I don't know, like white people just really like beer. I don't know why people of color don't like it. Like, that's not a thing. I mean, we can all say it, but that solves nothing. That moves the conversation half an inch forward. Just say, I know people of color who really enjoy beer, but they don't feel comfortable going to bars. You know, is there a way to do a night where someone does a tasting with like a group of people or whatever? And and even if it goes down in flames, at least you're like, we tried.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's just all you need to do is we tried.
Yeah. And like you say, the effort, the intention needs to be one of sincerity. Like, you're not doing it because you're trying to capitalize on a chunk of uncapitalized dollars. Like, you're doing it because you genuinely want to make the place that you work more inclusive. And if that's the thing, I think even if you get it wrong, I mean, if you get it real wrong, and that's another story, but if you get it wrong, but you were genuinely trying, I think that means that you're already in that place where you will hear that, and then you will work with the feedback. So that's, yeah.
And I think a lot of breweries really are doing that. And then there are a lot of breweries who are just like, I'm sorry, it was just a joke. And it's, you know, when someone calls you out, like, don't get your back up. We all want to get our back up because no one wants to be called out. But at the same time, it's like, you also don't want to lose what could have been a diehard fan because you took a really weird, lame route to be like, well, we're just kidding and it's an inside joke and like, you won't get it.
Right.
And it's, yeah, I think that I think the reason that I'm always willing to talk about this, and we'll probably talk about it, like, this is going to be like in my dying breath. It's going to be, what about the sexist labels? And then I die.
Yeah, that's right.
But I think it's one of those things where it's like, we need to keep talking about it. And I keep talking about it because I'm so passionate about it, but I have no answer for it, which is why I keep talking about it. Because it's just, I have suggestions and I have moments of like, I got no idea, like, you've got me stumped. But if we keep talking about it, maybe one day someone will show up and be like, actually, carry the 4, here's your correct answer.
Yeah, that's right. Like, by the way, I've been working on this, and here's the answer: is we got it. We just need to implement now. Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned this. You said it. I shouldn't say mentioned it. You said it very clearly. I think it bears repeating. As much as it's important that we need, you know, marketers and brewers and whoever being willing to listen, I think it's important, especially in the same way the age of the internet has, you know, led us to people who can be pretty like lowbrow in their criticisms. It's also led to people who can be pretty self-righteous in their criticisms. And so it's as important that, particularly if you're bringing a complaint, not as a person from the affected group, but as just an observer saying, hey, this is not okay. The way that you have that conversation, the way that you start it, needs to be one where your intention is dialogue and your intention is restoration of the situation as opposed to being right. And I think that goes a long way. You're always going to get the douchebags who'll be like, oh, it's just a joke, bro. But there's a big middle ground, I bet, there where the response from whoever you reach out to will vary depending on how you reach out. And I know, not from experience, but from anecdote, when you're coming from one of the groups being directly affected, maybe your reaction is going to be a little bit more heavy-handed. And you know what? That's maybe not okay, but it's a given. Like, if you spend enough time getting pissed on, eventually you snap and lash out, and I give space for that. But if the conversations, the effort can be one of dialogue, that is a good thing, I think.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, that's how things have to start, because, you know, it's easy to be just angry and lash out. But if the person that you're being angry and lashing out with is like, I had no idea, like, it's, you know, it's not a tread lightly, but it's use your words, just be constructive, you know, and it's just, because no one ever wants someone to show up and be like, you are racist. You want to shut a conversation down? You call someone racist. There's no coming back from that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You could bring up Hitler too. That helps.
Right. You remind me of a young Hitler. Conversation's over. It's done. And I think that we really need to keep avenues open. And it's one of those things where I just saw some comments online that they had posted about, we're doing a bevy in March where it's an all-female beer festival.
Mm-hmm.
And the first 3 comments are guys being like, so if I did an all-male festival, like that would be okay? And it's like, dude, that's Toronto Festival of Beer.
Well, and the other thing is, it's like, hey, bro, you haven't obviously seen the cute meme that goes around that shows the difference between equality and justice. Equality would be, we could do it that way. Justice is, we admit that there's a systemic problem and we need to work to overcome it.
Yeah. And I mean, again, not knocking Toronto Festival of Beer because the organizers work their butts off. But most beer festivals are dude festivals. So to see these guys being like, well, why won't you invite me to your thing? Oh my God. And then calling us every name in the book. And it's like, this is why there's still a problem. Yeah. And this is why groups like us and Barley's Angels and like, the Pink Boot Society and all of these things still exist, because you are totally butthurt that you can't come to our party, but whenever we come to your party, we're the dancers.
Right.
Like, and it's like, this is why it's not changing fast enough. Having gone to Vancouver last summer and seeing a million women, so it seemed, owning breweries or being head brewers was amazing. Like, I remember being like, where are all the female sales reps? And I was like, oh, you don't have any because you guys all run the breweries.
Right.
And I don't know how long it'll take us to get to that level, but I want to see it where it's like actually getting closer.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. Like, again, with that idea, like, where's the person with the answer? I'm just like, I mean, I think slowly it certainly is changing. The industry is changing for the better, but it's a slog. And yeah, I mean, the big focus that most people bring up and what we talked about right off the top is about gender stuff, but there's a host of other issues about making an equal and, accessible environment for everybody. We haven't even touched on, there's more, groups of disaffected people within the craft industry that we haven't touched on. And it's like, yeah, every step we make forward in one group, it's like, well, yeah, but what if, like we haven't touched First Nations yet.
Yeah.
Like where's First Nations in craft brewing?
Yeah,
What's
exactly.
Up? Right. So, it feels monumentally huge and I'm staying away from impossible because it's not impossible, but my gosh, it's challenging. It's difficult.
Oh, definitely. But I have faith. I think at some point we can make it to the point where it's not, I'm going to say we're going to make it to the point where when I have these thoughts about these ridiculous labels, I don't start singing Frank Zappa's Titties and Beer.
Maybe that'll be the intro. Okay, let's cap it. It is late and my voice is turning into jazz voice. I'm going to flip over to CBC Radio 2 and introduce some songs by, that's Jimmy Swanson on the claves. Anyway, we always wrap up talking about what's coming down the pipe. I am still going to Nicaragua in T-minus. Oh, good golly, 9 days. Scary. But there are probably some beer events coming down the pipe. You guys have got, you said February 18th is remind me the name?
It is Women in Beer, and that's hosted at the Craft in Tirana.
And I did get February 18th, right?
Yes, you did. And then February 22nd, we're actually doing a beer dinner. It's beer and chocolate. And so that'll be good too. And then,
next week I'm going to be hopefully talking to Avon from Amsterdam Brewhouse about beer and food.
Amazing.
Yep.
I'm going to listen to that one.
Yep.
Yeah, and then March 31st is our big bevy.
Nice one. I don't know the dates, but it's got to be coming up. We always like can be kind of like, either we just had a great time at the only whichever season craft beer fest, or it's got to be coming up. I think it's coming up. And Roundhouse Winter Craft Beer Fest. Do you know you got any deets on that?
That is February 11th, I believe. Completely sold out. Looks like it's going to be a fun time. And I'm going to be in Toronto for it. So.
Woohoo! That's actually Ben's half birthday party we're having, because Ben and his buddy both are August babies. Or Nils might be July, but whatever, summer babies, and so they don't often get to do the big, bring a bunch of buddies out birthday parties. So we're doing half birthday for them this year, and it's that day. So.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, I think that means I'm going to take a pass on the craft beer festival, though. But yeah, I get to them a lot, so it's not the end of the world. It's all good. People, if they want to reach out to you on Twitter or any of that fancy stuff?
I'm on all the social media things because I'm exciting. It is all 35mm monkey, so 35 millimeter monkey.
Yep.
And that is Instagram and Twitter. And yeah, don't add me on Facebook because that's creepy.
It is kind of weird. It is, yeah, I do a lot of public stuff because that's just kind of my jam. And one day I looked at like the number of people who follow me, which means that like either they requested to be friends and I said no, or they didn't even request. They just followed me. It's not that high, but it was like higher than I was expecting. I was like,
yeah.
Oh, and just that it's like, I don't know, something about following on Facebook just feels weird. Anyway, we'll put all that stuff in the show notes. Ren's happy to engage in the conversation, even if we don't come up with the solution off the top of our heads. Let's keep it rolling, keep it going. And yeah, we'll be back, like I say, hopefully next week with Chef Avon Wells, and we'll talk a bit food and beer. Ren, thank you. Glad we finally got it sorted out.
I know, seriously, this is great.
Yeah, maybe we'll do it again. Maybe when we've fixed the problem. No, we'll do it before then anyway.
We'll do it before then.
Definitely. All right. Thanks for joining me. And everyone listening, thank you. We'll talk to you next week.